Hi everyone, welcome back to the garden. In today's video, we're going on a walk around this jungle part of my garden. And I know what you're thinking, didn't we just do that a few weeks ago? Well, a lot can happen in a few weeks. Usually, the autumns here in the UK seem to stretch out. Dull, windy, rainy weather for months on end. And in fact, most of summer can be like that too. But this year, we've had a first early blast of wintry weather. Yes, I know it's not technically winter yet, but this past week it certainly felt like it. And today, as I'm filming this, it's only really hovering about freezing. Definitely a little bit chilly. And nearly time for us northerners to start thinking about getting our big coats out, but not just yet. Today, we're going to look around the garden and see how a lot of my exotic plants have reacted to the cold spell. We've had snow this week, which unfortunately I couldn't film because I actually happened to be at work quite early for most of the week and missed seeing the garden in its beautiful snowy glory. And then we've had some cold nights. -2 for a few nights and then a -4, maybe even reaching -5. So it's definitely been cold. What's been the effects of such cold temperatures early in the season on the garden? Well, let's have a look. And let's also look at what protection I actually did in my garden. You might have seen my guides on how to protect tree ferns, bananas, everything like that. Today you're going to see what I've actually done, the reasons why I've done it, and how things might be looking after the cold spell. Quick little look at this tree fern here. This one looks green. Do the others? Well, let's get into it. Borinda papyrifera then, the blue bamboo, has come through the cold spell surprisingly okay. As you can see, the leaves are hardly even crisped up at all. In fact, it's quite beautiful to see here on this glorious morning, that gentle breeze slowly pushing the culms around. You can hear the papery noise that the sheaths make. A stunning plant, and one that's come through this cold bite very, very well. But the same can't be said for many of these other plants. Starting off with the tree ferns. So as you can see, I've gone for the fleece in the crowns there to help protect the most tender part of them. Unfortunately, as you can see, the fronds, they're starting to blacken already. And usually within a day or so, you can see this browning, blackening start to occur, and it can steadily get worse over the next week or so. And that just means really it's got too cold for the fronds to remain green, which is quite unfortunate, but I think it really shows just how cold this early wintry weather has actually been. Completely blasted. But as we go through the garden, we'll see some other tree ferns and how I've chosen to protect them. The Trachycarpus princeps newform hybrid, looking stunning as ever, green and beautiful. If you come out early in the morning or when it's still around freezing, you can see these dark speckled sort of mottling marks on the leaves. Those are perfectly normal. It's how the plant just responds to cold temperatures, and it'll go back to being a glorious green colour in no time at all. Which is more than can be said for the Tetrapanax. They're definitely looking a little bit sorry for themselves, shall we say. Look at these. Those beautiful big green leaves have got completely bitten, chewed away by the frost, and all that's left are basically dark black leaves that are slowly going to fall off over the next few weeks. So it's unfortunate, but Tetrapanax, as I've described in my videos in the past, are essentially deciduous in the colder areas of the UK. And us being in the north of England and in North Lincolnshire, quite a rural place, it's definitely been too cold for them even this early in the winter season. In fact, it's not even winter yet, is it? It's still in November. Those then have essentially lost all the leaves now until spring, when the weather gets milder and they're tempted to grow. Did I protect them? No, I didn't, because these plants here have got tough, woody stems. I've just left them to it, and as you can see, they are reasonably firm. What happens if you lose one of your Tetrapanax, such as that one at the back there? As you can see, it's a smaller plant, a younger plant, one that's been struggling from being under the shade of the tree ferns and many other trees behind it. That one has started to collapse over. So as you can see, I've probably lost some of the height on it. It might start to resprout from further down the trunk, or what can happen is you lose the whole trunk entirely, and then in spring, you get something like this appearing, a little forest of mini Tetrapanax. So the plants themselves are incredibly tough and hardy. How well they get through the winter, as always, depends on how big the plant is and how cold the winter gets. But I'm not concerned about it. For around -4 or so for one night and a few nights of -2s, these plants should be perfectly tough and hardy and able to cope with the weather. Looking through there, you'll see the Fatty japonica plain green form looking beautiful as ever. A slightly darker olive colour in response again to the cold, but no problems there whatsoever. But either side of it, you'll see these enclosures here. So you might see my last video, a bit of a last minute wrap up of a Musa basjoo. Well, that is pretty much all I had time for. So when it came to here, the Musa basjoo at the front and the Musa Tibet at the back over there, I basically had to do it very, very quickly, using some straw around the base and then just chucking a load of fleece bags over them. So I had a few fleece bags in each one, and I'm sure that'll be perfectly sufficient to keep the height for this winter spell. Whether I choose to do a more permanent job and protect them from any future colder spells potentially is, well, let's just say that remains to be seen. But for now at least, I'm confident that some simple fleece bags will protect these plants and all the height from -2s, 3s, 4s and potentially 5s. Now unfortunately, that gorgeous salvia that you saw, the concolor, it doesn't look so gorgeous anymore. This was truly a stunning plant just a couple of weeks ago. That magnificent height, 8 to 9 foot tall, beautiful bluey violet flowers. It's now been reduced to this mess, and in fact, as I walk past here, you can smell the sort of decaying leaf matter in the air. Not the best smell. And in fact, if you've ever lost an agave in winter, you'll know what that smells like. It really is a pungent aroma. It's not quite as bad as that here, but I can definitely smell the decaying Tetrapanax leaves that have been completely sheared off by the cold. Now as we head through, you'll see I haven't wrapped all the tree ferns. What I did before this last cold spell, and what I certainly recommend you doing before the next one, is putting fleece into the crowns of them. So essentially just, when I say a ball of fleece, it is literally just a length of fleece, squash it into a ball, and then I push it gently into the crown and try to wedge it around the frond bases. But unfortunately, there's no real easy way of protecting these beautiful fronds, and as you can see, they're browned and blackened, which really is a shame because these plants, these magnificent beauties, have the potential to be an evergreen here in mild winters or milder parts of the UK. This winter though, unfortunately, I'm going to be looking at a brown mess, which is unfortunate, but at least the plants themselves will be okay, and it makes you look forward to spring and seeing those beautiful, vibrant, lush green fronds even more. But for what I did here, I basically wrapped up the top foot of trunk very, very quickly using a length of fleece. What I did is I bought a roll that was 2 meters wide and then I basically tripled it over to make it very easy to wrap. There's only one actual layer going round, but it itself is folded over 3 times. So 40 gram per meter fleece, that's about 120 grams. Just literally folded around it once, and then I used some of the paracord that I talked about in my basjoo video to wrap it around. Nice, quick and easy. Did I do it for all the tree ferns? No. In my tree fern video, I talk about the frost protection in the crown being the first step of winter protection. Do that when there's a, we'll say a freeze or sub-zero temperatures forecast. And then if it's forecast to be -3 or so, I wrap them up. This time round, I took a halfway measure, which is to wrap up the most exposed ones. At this end of the garden here, where they're exposed to the north and east, it's definitely a colder part of the garden. So it's important to learn where the cold parts of the garden are and where the shelter ones are, because microclimates, when it comes to exotic gardening, really are everything. And as we head through, you'll see this glorious tree fern here. I don't usually bother to protect this one unless it gets very, very cold. But unfortunately, despite having the overhead cover of the other tree ferns above it, I think some of these fronds have just been bitten by the frost there. You can just see that browning. At the end of the day, if it is going to be a cold winter, there's not a lot you can do to actually protect the fronds anyway. But whether they're completely brown or they're looking a little bit on the browned off side, the important thing is not to chop them off until the new ones are starting to come through next year. Borinda lushuiensis, or Yunnan 4. This bamboo, I've talked about in the past, isn't the hardiest bamboo. Unfortunately, it can only take around -7, -8. And if you look up here, you'll see what is a perfectly normal stress response to the cold conditions. The leaves are closed up, they look very thin. They're starting to get a little bit of browning at the ends there. The newest growth has just been zapped. Obviously the plant itself will be fine, and down here, the growth is completely beautiful and green. But this is a plant which definitely shows its dislike of cold temperatures very quickly. And in fact, if we look around here, I just noticed this. One of the culms that hadn't quite formed properly has just snapped off. And this can happen sometimes with bamboo. They really aren't quite in sync with our growing season sometimes. That culm was obviously sent up too late and it just simply couldn't take the cold. So I can just chop that one back. The rest of the plant, I'll leave it to it. And in late springtime, it'll have a beautiful new display of those gorgeous green leaves. The Trachycarpus princeps new form hybrid palm. Big, beautiful, whatever the weather. Really stunning. And again, I keep mentioning this in my videos. If you see this when you're coming outside with a head torch at night, those beautiful silvery blue undersides really are something to behold. Absolutely stunning. But stunning maybe isn't a word that I'd use to describe the jungle clearing area now. Yes, it's completely transformed. It looks dramatically different to when you last saw it just a couple of weeks ago. It really is amazing the difference a couple of weeks can make to a garden, for better or worse here in the UK. And at this time of the year, a sudden early cold snap can really send things into winter mode, and that's exactly where we are. So spinning round, you'll see what I talked about as being a beautiful lush green view, waves of green. Well, some of those waves have now been replaced by, or imminently, with browning tree fern fronds. Again, they've all been blackened by the frost. There's nothing you can really do about this. Yes, I know you can potentially hold them upwards and wrap the whole thing, but in all honesty, I don't think that's really practical, and ultimately a cold winter can zap the fronds anyway. The most important thing with tree ferns is to protect the trunk. So the only reason I'm dwelling on this is, if this has happened to your tree ferns, if they've been brown like this, even if you didn't actually protect the crowns, now is the best time to protect the crowns before the next cold spell, and don't worry about the actual fronds, they'll just be fine. Down here is a plant which I actually missed the first time round, but I'm sure you can forgive me for that because it's hard to see. Here is an Impatiens omiana ice storm, a lovely little foliage plant, delicate yellow flowers later in the season, but right now it's disappeared into the ground. Yes, some frosts are enough to flatten this plant completely, but I found it to be very tough and hardy, and it's one that stays in the ground for me. And in fact, it's quite a vigorous little plant. I originally planted it just over the other side of that little stone wall there, and it's popped up over here. So it helps to soften the edges nicely, in summer at least. Right now, it's not softening anything. As you can see there, lushuiensis doesn't look quite as bad from this angle. In fact, you can really see the beauty of those green leaves. I know bamboo is a plant which gets a lot of negative press, but really, when you've got the space for it, the right space, should I say, the right bamboo, and you see it, they just bring so much to the garden. Structure, beauty, movement on the day like today with a gentle breeze. I know by the time you're watching this, that breeze might not be quite as gentle, but they really are a stunning plant and they bring so much joy to my garden. Over here, you'll see the beautiful Angustissima. I've featured this one before. Such a contrast to the big timber bamboos. This graceful beauty has really dainty leaves, and as you can see, following nights of -2s, 3s, 4s, maybe even below, it looks perfectly fine, and it actually looks stunning with the frost on it. So it's good to know that the main structure of my garden, the real big plants that create that evergreen jungle vibe, look fantastic regardless of the temperature. This Trachycarpus nova now, with nothing around it. Yes, it looks a little bit tatty. It's not the best palm for windy locations, but it's really starting to hold its own now on this part of the garden. Big leaves, magnificent form, and again, more greenery to look at when the rest of the garden is looking quite dull. So let's zoom in then on some bits that don't look quite so good. Fatsia japonica spider's web. This one has really been hit by the frost, and in fact I think I might lose these flowers. They were beautiful, covered in bees just a couple of weeks ago. Usually they're tough enough to make it through, but potentially with this plant being in quite an exposed area, the cold winds pushing through the garden, it might just have been a little bit too much for it. The actual plant itself will be perfectly fine, and if your Fatsia is looking like it's wilting like this, the leaves are slightly glazed over, maybe a darker colour, don't worry about it. It's a perfectly normal response to cold temperatures and freezes, and it'll bounce back as soon as the weather warms up. Which is potentially more than you can say for the Begonia grandis. Yes, in my garden, I've talked about how a lot of my, we'll say, low-level shade-tolerant planting will be made up of these hardy begonias. But at this time of the year, that autumn foliage is very quickly faded, and we're left with quite a mushy mess. Flowers, stems, leaves, they're all just slowly melting into the ground now. Unfortunately, that's just what happens at this time of year. And what I've done is, very simply, just mulch the ground below with some straw, because these are very tough and hardy. I just like to do a little bit of something with some leaves to keep the worst of the cold off. The antartica came inside, definitely last minute, Sunday night last week, just before the cold hit. That came inside, and I took inside the few tender begonias, the merrymakers around it. So they're hopefully going to come through the winter inside and bring some more colour and vibrancy to the garden next year. I made the decision to chop the persicaria down. I know you can leave some plants over winter and they can really help to provide a home for insects and everything. But with these, they go that mushy when they've had a cold spell. It made sense to have a little bit of a tidy up prior to the cold snap. Just tidy things up while the stems are still firm. And that way, I can at least tidy things to a point, not have mushy, soggy leaves everywhere. But of course, everything that I chopped down for this part of the garden, all the soft growth has gone directly onto the soil with the tree leaves. You were pleased to hear. Now, another begonia here. This one really did look beautiful until very recently, but again, completely taken right back. And I think the important thing to remember about UK tropical or jungle gardens is you really need to pay attention to the weather and the forecast, because how your garden looks completely depends on the weather, and when you need to wrap also completely depends on the weather. So there's no point thinking, right, it's November, time to pack my whole garden away. You really have to go by the forecast and try to get as much out of your garden as you possibly can. Don't wrap things until the last minute. But on the subject of last minutes, can you remember my beautiful Farfugium green giant? Well, it's no longer green and no longer giant. Unfortunately, the leaves have been really blackened by the frost. It actually took one of the first -2 nights just fine. But now, after -4 and -5, it's completely folded over. It really looks a mess. This is one of the plants I was a bit on the fence about. Does it need to be frost-free for winter? Can it take some frost? And I went into this winter thinking it can probably take about -5 or so. That's about its limit. So I'll give it a good mulch and see if it comes back. Because part of my experiment for this part of the garden here is to try plants which I can leave outside. Plants like the hardy gingers, the hardy begonias. So I really want to see if this Farfugium can make it through and isn't just another little tender diva plant that needs to go inside for winter. So we'll see how it goes. I was expecting it to be a bit back and head down to the ground, ready to sprout again next spring. Hopefully that happens. More begonias there, completely folded over at the back, but again, they should be fine. They'll just die back to the ground and appear again next spring. This tree fern, I again protected the crown and just put a bit of hessian over the top. So I could hopefully show you the difference overhead cover makes. And you can probably just see here, the fronds directly below the hessian are green, and further away, they're definitely more of a brown colour. So in fact, although all these fronds are going to die, I just thought it'd be an interesting little experiment to see how much just any layer of material can protect a plant. Because ultimately, overhead cover is one of the most common and easiest forms of microclimate, and it can make all the difference on how a plant cosmetically looks after a cold spell. Over here, well, this part of the garden looked fantastic just a few weeks ago. I had the beautiful gingers slowly fading away, colouring up with all kinds of beautiful autumnal hues. But now that's no longer. The gingers I chopped back. I took out the tender fuchsias. I've actually moved them to polytunnel. Hopefully they come through, but if they don't, lesson learnt there. And what I've done is use the leftover straw from packing up the Musa basjoo, all my canna leaves and seti leaves, gingers, they've all gone on top of the soil. And if you do that at this time of the year, sure, they won't all necessarily rot down over winter. You can chop them up to speed the process, but it really helps to mulch the plants that are in the ground. You're protecting those rhizomes, the bulbs, the corms, the tubers that are close to the surface of the soil. And in the case of these gingers here, the Assam orange, yes, they're very tough and hardy, but if there is a prolonged freeze which penetrates into the ground, then just having a little bit of a mulch over the top of the ground, or quite a thick layer, can make all the difference. At the back there, you'll see Tetrapanax. This one just a standard papyrifer, and again, completely folded over, essentially deciduous here. No protection here, no worries. I'd only really protect it if there was a real hard frost forecast. We're talking less than -5 for a prolonged duration. And even then, I'd only protect them for the duration of the cold. Unlike the Musa basjoo hardy banana, which will stay wrapped for the remainder of winter, over here, this Butia eriospatha, Brazilian jelly palm, this beautiful feather palm won't get wrapped at all unless temperatures dip below -5 or there is a severe frost. It's a really deceptively tough plant. As you can see, beautiful green in the middle, and it really just takes severe prolonged cold to damage it. So for hardy palms like that, which definitely have a limit, it's important to only protect them if we're approaching that limit, and again, for the duration of the cold spell. But panning around a bit more, you'll see the gunnery leaves there, still protecting the crowns, plenty of layers over them. And if they look a bit messy this year, it's because I actually decided to use the biggest leaves on top of them. So when I built the actual pyramids over the gunneries, I then used the biggest leaves just to chuck over and give it a bit of extra protection. And extra protection really is the name of the game when it comes to this tree fern. This is the one that hadn't done very well. Now, it's quite close to the base of the tree behind, but also, as we look this way, the winds really whistle through the garden. So in winter, the drying weather, the cold, the wind combined really isn't a great mix for tree ferns. So I think this one was stressed out in the previous winter, and I will be essentially protecting it, taking it to the next level over what it actually needs. So rather than just protecting the crown, this time, especially with the fronds being quite short, I put a fleece bag over the top and wrap the top foot of trunk to just give it that bit of extra protection. But by the time you watch this weekend, temperatures will be up to nearly 15 degrees, a swing completely in the other direction. Not an especially enjoyable 15 degrees with 50-mile-an-hour winds and driving rain, but essentially this protection won't be required. And if I left it on, it will just blow away, end up the other side of the village on the motorway, and probably take half the fronds with it. So what I'll be doing, by the time you watch this video probably, is nipping around the garden, taking out any fleece balls from the tree fern crowns, the hessian sac, anything loose, and just taking those inside to A, let the tree ferns breathe, and B, let them get some moisture while it's raining. One of my questions I get asked a few times over pretty much every winter is, do you need to water tree ferns in winter? Usually in the UK, we enjoy quite a wet climate over winter, if enjoy is the word, but we do occasionally have dry spells. So whilst I don't water them while we're in a freezing spell, I won't water it today because tonight is going to be -2 again. As soon as the cold has passed, if there isn't any rain on the horizon, it's well worth giving them a soak in. And if nothing else, it's going to help alleviate some of the stress that drying winds, such as that there right on cue, and freezing temperatures cause to the plant. Remember, these plants come from usually quite sheltered environments with plenty of rainfall, so anything you can do to get them a little bit closer to that is appreciated. But I don't water them right before a cold spell. As you can see now, the overhead cover dramatically reduced, the leaves pretty much gone, and that does make a difference. What it actually means is the harder frosts permeate now even into the middle of the garden. So as you can see, we're now at about 11 o'clock. It's pretty much above freezing now, but we've still got a frost in those leaves. But you can see here, around the areas where I really want to improve the soil, help retain more moisture in summer, adding a good thick layer of these leaves really does make all the difference, and something which I do every single year. And in fact, next year, I'm going to try and get even more tree leaves to sprinkle them around the borders. But today, the ground, you can probably see there, the ground is still pretty much frozen. Not down to any kind of great depth, but it's definitely cold here, and it's unlikely to thaw out for today. So I guess if you want to see things on a positive note, plenty of the plants here don't require any protection. The big Trachycarpus look beautiful, absolutely nothing required there. Plenty of jungle vibes from those. The vivax or vivax bamboos, again, stunning colours, beautiful greens, nothing required whatsoever. The Fatzias, yes, they definitely display signs of stress during cold weather, but they'll come back and not a problem at all. And then the Scheffleras, the gorgeous hardy umbrella trees, no problems there whatsoever. They can take lower than -4, and yes, they can take significantly lower than -5, -6 even. But if it does get much colder, you might find the main stem does just die back a little bit, but the plant itself should shoot back away. So essentially the garden now is winter ready. That's where things are. The beautiful evergreens are really coming into their own right now. All the plants are protected away for winter, and pretty much now everything that's covered over, mulched, or taken into the polytunnel, which is basically just my gingers and cannas in pots and any young exotics that I've got, everything now is pretty much going to stay where it is. So all we need to do now over winter is monitor the forecasts and just decide when, if there's a real cold spell forecast, we protect things for that cold. But as always, it's important to only protect for the cold spell, only protect for the duration, and make sure that you're protecting enough for the cold that you anticipate having. So there we are, a cold, breezy morning, the garden frosty, frozen. It's easy to get down at this time of the year and think, yeah, the garden's looking rough. Those tree ferns, I really was looking forward to seeing them look beautiful and green over winter. That's not going to happen now. But ultimately, we live in the UK, and especially for those of us up north, this is perfectly normal winter weather. I'm not worried, I'm not concerned. Everything that needs protecting got protected, even if it was a little bit last minute. And from now on, it's pretty much just a case of monitoring the temperatures and basically wrapping it all last minute to suit. But no problem, no stress, and there's still plenty of plants to enjoy over the coming months. But anyway, hope you've enjoyed this quick look around tropical garden realities, practicalities. Don't worry if your garden looks a bit of a mess right now. And don't worry if plants look a bit blackened and browned. The tree ferns will come back, no problem at all. And hopefully you haven't had any real damaging cold. But feel free to let me know in the comments below, what temperatures did you get down to this past week? Did you get lower than -5? And how do your plants look? I hope we get some more of these crisp, beautiful days going forwards. But unfortunately, I suspect by the time you're watching this, the weather is slightly less calm and tranquil. But thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video. See you later.